Chapter 76. Which is how, later that day, Grandpa Byron and I end up in Bladen, 15 miles up the Tyne from the coast. And I tell you, 15 miles on the back of a little moped is enough punishment for anyone's bottom. Grandpa Byron's been telling me that when we first came to the UK, Bladen was a coal mining village. There's no mining here now, just street after street of neat red brick houses, and a supermarket and a garage, and it's just like everywhere else really, except it's up one side of a valley, and in some places you can get to see right down to the River Tyne and across the other side, and that's pretty cool. And that's where my mum, Sarah, lives, on a wide road outside Bladen. Grandpa Byron's already phoned her to tell her he's coming. They stayed in touch for a while after her near drowning. She invited him to her wedding, to Roddy, a policeman, but he didn't go, and then they kind of drifted out of each other's lives. But as Grandpa Byron pointed out, it's difficult to hide these days unless you really want to, and it didn't take him long to track her down. The trouble is, of course, that my mum is only my mum in another, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get a technical here, space-time dimensional thingy. She's not my mum here. In fact, I'm not completely sure Grandpa Byron has understood, and who can blame him? Quite what he's thinking, I don't know. I don't actually think he's worked it out beyond a boy needs his mum. Now we're outside her front door, and even though Grandpa Byron has told me to be calm and not to freak her out, when she opens the door, she is exactly my mum, even down to the way she's wiping her hands on the tea towel. And something in me just pulls me forward, and before anything else happens or another greeting, I just say, "Hi, Mum," and I wrap her up in my arms, and I just know at that moment that she's the most powerful force in the universe. A parent's love will make her see the truth, and she will know that I'm her son, and she'll fold my arms around me and kiss the top of my head and say, "I've missed you, Al, all my life I've missed you, and now you're here, and everything will be all right." Except she doesn't, and it isn't. It is awful. She kind of gently eases herself out of my arms and holds on to them and looks into my face and says, okay? And I say, "Mum," and I know I've blown it. She's totally freaked out, though she's kind enough not to make it obvious. Her eyes flick to Grandpa Byron's. She's still holding my arms at my side and that I can't hug her again. "This is, Grandpa Byron says, "this is my grandson, Al Chowdhury." Mum lowers her head and looks into my eyes and says a bit slowly, "Hello, Al. Nice to meet you." Of course, she thinks I'm slow or have some sort of mental disability. Why wouldn't she? So begins the most awkward, uncomfortable 15 minutes of my life. Or, to adapt the hot stove pretty girl analogy of my namesake Professor Einstein, 15 minutes in the presence of someone who is both is and is not your mum, along with her suspicious husband, feels like a lifetime. We go through, me and Grandpa Byron, and we sit in her tidy front room. Her husband Roddy, who's now an inspector of the Northumbria police, brings tea and a juice in a box for me, and I act like I'm 5 or something. She and Roddy and Grandpa Byron talk adult small talk about how you have beans and everything, which lasts a few minutes, and I learn that she and Roddy have no children, but several nieces and nephews that they're very fond of, and they moved here about 8 years ago when Roddy built a conservatory himself and blah, blah, blah. But then it starts to get a bit tricky because all this while I have said nothing and there are some big question marks hanging in the air. Who am I? Why did I call her Mum? And so on. Mum says to Grandpa Byron, "Did you say Al was your grandson? By your daughter, Hypatia, yes. Didn't she move to America or Canada ages ago?" She came back." Then Roddy chips in. "And he has your surname, Chowdhury?" Perhaps it's just me, perhaps it's just because I'm on edge, and he's a policeman, but there's almost silent suspicion in his voice. "Yes, we wanted to keep the name in the family," says Grandpa Byron airily. Too airily, if you ask me, because there's still something going on in Roddy's eyes. And me. I'm sitting there saying nothing at all. I mean, I can't, can I? What can I possibly say? It just can't get any worse. By the way, whenever anyone says to you, remember that it will get worse, it did for me, and it was all my fault. I'm on her shiny black sofa, and there's one thing I can do to show her that we have a connection that might persuade her that she is my mum, and my syndactylic toes I wait till Roddy's left the room and for a moment, and then without saying anything, quickly take off my shoe and sock and say, "Look, another tip. If you're in strange company and want to convince someone beyond doubt that you are mentally deranged in some way, taking off your shoes and socks and saying, 'Look,' is a good way of doing it. I now know." Mum barely glances at my feet, but smiles indulgently and a bit nervously, and her eyes look at Grandpa Byron, sort of pleading for help. "My toes," I say, "syndalactic, like my mum's." "Oh, yes," my mum says enthusiastically, but it's not her real voice. It's the voice that people who don't have children use when they talk to children. A bit too sing-songy. "Did your grandpa tell you I have that too? You probably know how rare it is, how unusual. You're very special, Al, aren't you?" Special. Mum's smiling at me, but it's not a real smile either. It's a sympathetic, synthetic smile, which might be all I will ever get from her. It's time to go. I can't stand it anymore, and I quickly put on my shoe and sock back on and stand up as Roddy comes back into the room. Mum says, "From your mum, you say?" Then to Grandpa Byron, "I don't remember you saying Hypatia had syndalactyl." "Ah, he's confused, bless him. He means his dad. Anyway, nice to see you again, Sarah, Roddy, and it's like we can't get out of the house fast enough. I know that I've been acting oddly, and there's just this look that is still on Roddy's face as he and Mum say goodbye, and please come again and all of that. And I know I have messed up, but I still try one more tactic. Say hi to Auntie Ellie for me," I say, and Mum gets this shocked look on her face as Grandpa Byron practically pulls me up the driveway. Back on the scooter, we're a little way up the street, and I crane my neck back to see Roddy turn to Mum. He purses his lips and shakes his head, and it's at that exact moment that I can see what's coming, and I know what I have to do. Chapter 77 tomorrow.